educate, empower, enable, impact. Thank you for tuning in to That Will Never Work podcast, where we share inspiring information and personal experiences related to business and the entrepreneurial journey from those who are leaders in their respective field. Now, here's your host, author and business coach, Maurice.
Thank you very much for tuning in today. Welcome to an empowering show. I have a guest that empowers executives, founders to lead with authenticity, conviction, and confidence so they can make a positive impact in their lives, organizations, and their communities, which all of us are really trying to do. As an adoptive parent who grew up internationally, navigating mental and physical wellness, she learned that emotional resilience must be earned. The process of uncovering and understanding the significance of her core values became the key to the process that allows her clients to do the exact same thing. She works with leaders who feel stifled and have grown unsatisfied with their current level of influence. She facilitates empowered and improved communication and corporate culture by working within teams. A lot of us don't know how to do that, right? We're all growing in that space, right? You know, her passion is equipping female leaders to define a new culture by trusting their own ability to think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively. I thank y'all very much for listening today. Of course, she's not going to just talk to the female leaders. She's going to talk to us male leaders too. So I thank y'all for listening today. Andrea, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Maurice. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think it's going to be a good one.
Yes, it will be. I believe so. So, we're going to get all the way into the weeds, right? So, I've been listening to a lot of your episodes, doing my research, things like that. And there's something that you talk about. Oh, no, you're welcome. Most definitely. Most definitely. But there's something that you talk about being aware, the ABCs of awareness, the 3 levels of awareness. So what do you mean by that? Where does that come from?
Well, I'm a transformational leadership coach, and I am actually certified through the Maxwell Leadership Team. So I'm a DISC consultant, speaker, trainer, coach. And whenever you start talking to coaches, one of the first things they'll tell you is you have to first have awareness. And a lot of times we don't think about the fact that somebody just sitting in their cubicle or driving in their car may not have an understanding of what it means to be aware or not aware. I mean, we can on some level say, well, I wasn't aware of that, right?
Right.
But a lot of times we don't realize how that actually affects us in our lives. And when I talk to my clients and even just working through, because I don't know about you, but absolutely everything I teach, I've gone through. I mean, I can't teach anything that I haven't actually either worked through or experienced or tried, or,
Right.
It's just, that's the kind of teacher and coach that I am. And I don't know, I just finally decided that I needed to get all the way down, like you said, into the weeds and help people understand, because I wanted to say you have permission to do this, or you can do these things, or that's something that that many people are conditioned to think, and so many people, their eyes will just glaze over. Like, what are you talking about? Like, oh, we have to back it up a couple of steps. Oh, we have to back it up a couple of more steps. And so I find myself as a teacher by nature. I'm not a trained teacher. I just love to teach. Backing things up for people to the most simple explanation. And so when we talk about awareness, it's having, some people say, well, it's having this in your consciousness. Well, for instance, I like Formula One racing, and I missed I don't know if you've watched it at all or if you watch any kind of racing, but we're recording when Monaco was last week, and the famous Monte Carlo race. And there was something that happened, and somehow, I don't know I was doing, but I missed it. And I kept hearing about this one driver that was getting in trouble. And I noticed now today, I get this notification that he's going to be let go from his team at the end of the year. And I'm like, I still have yet to go back and see exactly what it was that caused the problem. I am not aware of it. And so I'm like, I have all these questions, and it makes no sense to me. And maybe this will happen to you in a friendship or a business acquaintance, where all of a sudden they're not talking to you anymore, or all of a sudden they're best friends with you, and you're like, what changed? Because you're not aware of something's happening below the surface. And so, in order to make changes, in order to grow,
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to change things, facilitate change
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, we have to know what we're dealing with. And so that's what awareness is. It's being able to know what you're dealing with. And I like to talk about my ABCs because number one, it's simple.
Right.
Acronyms are great. They're easy. ABC, 1, 2, 3,
Right.
get a little Michael Jackson going. But when I talk about ABCs, I'm talking about things that I call your assumptions, your
Mm-hmm.
beliefs, and your conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't own up to the fact that we have assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
that's the very top level of awareness. That's the
Mm-hmm.
kind I'll use many times an iceberg model to explain it. Our
Mm-hmm.
assumptions are what's above the water. That's
Yep.
what everybody can see. That's what the dudes in the Titanic could see.
Right.
And they weren't paying attention to the fact that it was just this
Underneath.
little bitty thing on the top,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
And we all have assumptions that we work within. They're fueled by or created by the belief systems that we have, the demographics we grew up in, the education that we might have, the business that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
There are like even my son is now going into the 10th grade, but until he finished 9th grade, he didn't have the same assumptions that he has going into 10th grade because he hadn't finished geometry and he hadn't finished health class and he hadn't finished, earth science. So he's now going into 10th grade knowing a lot of things. So
Right.
sometimes our assumptions are things, knowledge, that we know.
Right.
But we don't really have a problem with them until somebody bumps up against them, like I said with the Titanic.
Right.
It may be that something will happen that we'll realize, wait a minute, I just assumed it was this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we use that terminology a lot. It's usually in a very negative sense.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use the term assumption in a real positive sense. I learned long ago that if I just assume the best of people, it helps conversations go better. It helps relationships happen better. It takes the tension out. But most of the time we use that word in a negative sense. Well, I just assumed you were going to do your job, or I just assumed that you would meet my need. And so assumptions are things that are kind of like things that we just don't pay attention to. They're like, we assume that everybody has the same assumptions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at the iceberg model, assumptions are built on something else.
Right.
And they're built on what I call your beliefs. Your beliefs, a lot of people think that these are my values. And if we ever got into that core values conversation, your beliefs are not your core values. Beliefs are inherited, changeable. They're based on many things that have to do in our lives. And a lot of times we just don't realize these are under the surface. So when you see the top of the iceberg, the assumptions up there, then your beliefs are kind of below that and they sit on your beliefs. So your assumptions are kind of fed by, because I don't know for sure, I'm not a scientist, but I think the iceberg is kind of, the things at the top are kind of fed. Like, I think it like kind of grows a little bit, right?
Yes.
So the more you see more assumptions above, the more conditioning and beliefs you have below. But the beliefs we have are, when people say, well, no, my beliefs will never change. I hear you chuckle because I was in a conference this last week and I said, so does anybody here still believe in Santa Claus?
I know I do.
Oh. I'm not going to spoiler alert it for you then. I will not spoil it for you. But I usually say, ask anybody who's changed political parties. Ask anybody who's changed sports teams, allegiances, anybody who's changed religious affiliation. Those are all beliefs. And they are things that as we become more aware of things, we actually can choose whether or not we want to believe. So that's the assumptions, the A's and the B's, the beliefs. And then the conditioning is all that stuff that goes down way deep. Like an iceberg has a little tip at the top and usually has a tip at the bottom.
Yes.
And the conditioning that we have is not all bad. Some of it is good, but we just need to recognize that it's all below the surface. There's things that we may not have any clue that we believe or assume something in a certain way because we have grown up in a specific neighborhood, because we have grown up like I grew up in Seoul, Korea. So I grew up in a different neighborhood. I didn't even grow up in the United States.
Right.
And so I live here in Charlottesville, Virginia. Well, August of 2017 was an awakening for us in conditioning, for us, the whole entire community to say, wow, there's some conditioning that's been taking place here. Charlottesville's not done. um, but now there's an awareness, right?
Yes.
There's
Mhm.
those things have been brought to the surface so that we can actually see them as a community and figure out what we want to do with them and how we
Mhm.
want to move forward. And some people, it's really changed the way we move, and other people,
Mhm.
they've like dug in, you know.
Mhm.
So those are some pretty serious examples, but that gives you an idea of what the levels of awareness might be. And the hardest ones to get at are the things that we are conditioned to believe.
Mhm.
I'm also a woman from
Mhm.
the evangelical South. So there are certain things that I am conditioned to
Yeah.
believe. And that's one of the reasons why I love and I have a passion for working with women,
Mhm.
is because there's some conditioning that I understand
Mhm.
that other people aren't going to understand.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure that they get the message that the conditioning doesn't always have to be the final answer for
Mhm.
them. Right. So
Right.
that's ABCs in a nutshell. And
Okay.
then we use awareness though to build, to grow on, right? It's
Mhm.
like that's the almost a plumb line for us to be able to say, where do I need that now that I know these things about myself? And don't ever think, please, listener, don't ever think that you're going to know everything about yourself, because you're
Right.
just not. And you're
Right.
never going to plumb all the depths of your conditioning. But if you're willing to allow the Titanic to bump up against that conditioning and
Mhm.
say, "Oh, hang on, I might need to chip that away, or I might need to bring that into the light of day and take a look at it and
Right.
say, I don't need that anymore."
Right.
Or, "Oh, I'm so glad I had that, and now I can see what to do with it." So
Mhm.
it's this catalyst, stepping all the way back to your assumption. I mean, to your awareness, is this invitation, I think is a better word,
Mhm.
to move forward in new ways.
So there's two things I want to say. First,
Okay.
I want to touch the Santa Claus thing. So I'm gonna so I'm gonna tell you the reason. Of course, I don't believe all the way in Santa Claus, but it's
Sure,
the
sure.
idea of staying energetic, being alive, feeling like a kid, as an entrepreneur, willing to learn and all those type of things. But also in that, which goes into my second piece, which is giving yourself permission, which is something that you had mentioned, right? You have to be able to give yourself permission to grow. You have to give yourself permission to think outside the box. And I think all these things that you're referring to is giving yourself permission. Like you said, whatever is going through Charlottesville, you people have to give themselves permission to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to look at things from a different lens, a different perspective, and even for a moment say, hey, you know what? I feel a little more comfortable staying on this side than that side. But you
Mm,
still have to give yourself permission to look at it from a different, lens. So I think that's what I am really taking from what you're talking about is giving yourself permission to stay alive, to stay free, to because those values, those assumptions really can constrict us and actually suffocate us in certain situations.
absolutely. And I love your idea of I call what you described with your Santa Claus thing about entrepreneurship and stuff. I call that grown up wonder. And, I mean, it's like instead of looking at it's, you understand the whole idea behind Santa Claus. You don't just
Hmm.
expect things to show up because he came down the chimney. You now understand everything that goes into that and being willing to celebrate the beauty of that in the moment. And you're right. These are, I did say that at the very beginning. It's a little bit like I was trying to tell people they had permission, but I didn't know how to explain them permission from or for what.
Hmm.
And so understanding awareness and what you are aware of and what you're not aware of does give you permission. It is, like I said, an invitation to say, this could be different.
Hmm.
I could walk a different road. I could do something in a new way. And being able to do that is really foundational for any kind of personal growth.
So in there, how do one start to deconstruct it? Those pieces that might be holding us back um, because there's probably so many things as you talked about with the iceberg. You see what's on top, but you really have no clue how much is at the bottom. Even when it comes to a tree,
Right.
the bottom is what's underground is 2 to 5 times larger than what you see at the top. So how do you start to deconstruct that and pull away those little pieces? And give me a little snippet. Just give me a little snippet.
Well, you've used a word that I am very familiar with and fond of, which is deconstruction. And I'm learning a lot about that myself.
Mm-hmm.
But part of what I think deconstruction is being willing to like put on the scuba suit and go down below the water and say, what's down there,
Mm-hmm.
and decide whether or not I want it. Famously, the artist Michelangelo said, well, I take a piece of marble and I chip away what doesn't belong.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you see the statue David, it's beautiful, right? I mean, it's like we understand these are works of art, but how did he see that? Well, he was willing to try. He was willing to look at it. And being available to take in information and say, is this mine or is this not? And this is where number one, awareness comes in, but this is also where core values comes in, because when you understand who you are, how you're wired, and who you are as a person, and the things that are non-negotiables for you, all of a sudden you have these filters with which you can say, all right, so this is the conditioning that I was raised with, and this is what I've been hearing for the last 30, 40, I'm 57, like 50 years. Is that something that I want to hang on to? And when I run them through my core values of things like freedom of thought, and they're going to be different for every person, but for
Right.
me, like belonging, when I pull those and kind of run them through the filters, like, no, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's something I want to let go of. And I'm never going to be the person that tells anybody that quote unquote deconstruction is easy,
Mm-hmm.
but it is, like I said, I grew up in Korea, and they are famous for building really, I mean, you can see that when I was there in the 70s and 80s, they were not the powerhouse of technology and
Right.
modernity that they are today,
Right.
but it's because of their industrious spirit that they've gotten there. But they always used bamboo for scaffolding.
Mm.
And, in this country, it's like, no, you use steel scaffolding, you use all these aluminum rods and
Right.
planks and all kinds of stuff. And we used to stand and just watch them on tiptoeing around on bamboo and everything, figuring it all out. But you tell you what, it was very flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It was renewable. It was easy to use. They could raise it
Mm.
up by their hands. They didn't have to use big machinery.
Hmm.
And when we are willing to look at some of the things that we may need to quote take down or let go of or learn past,
Mm-hmm.
then if we're willing to look at them as like bamboo scaffolding around the important things in our lives, then we can actually take that down much simpler and realize, as Marie Kondo might have said, thank you for your service. You served me for a long time. I'm going to let you go now.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not an easy process. I've shared in podcasts and interviews that my own personal faith deconstruction of structures,
Mm-hmm.
not my actual beliefs, my actual relationship in my belief system,
Mm-hmm.
was very difficult for me. But once you start understanding that none of these things are that precious, what's most important is for you to be everything that you were designed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't show up that way, the rest of us really miss out.
Mm-hmm.
So being willing to say all these things I might have that are hanging around that are kind of weighing my iceberg down.
Right. Right.
Literally, it's like, what can I get rid of in order to
Mm-hmm.
buoy myself, in order to show up truly as me, so people can really see that beautiful tree that you're talking about
Right.
with a deep taproot system and stuff.
So some of this that we're talking about, we have to be intentional in getting to another place, right? And so that is your theme, intentional optimism, right?
You bet. Yes.
And because of our assumptions, our beliefs, our cores, our, trying to deconstruct our background, no matter what situation we might have been in, because of that, we become pessimists, right? We look, especially right now, looking at the news, like we don't think anything is going to be positive right now, right?
I just turn it off.
So because of that, we're so pessimistic about the financial health of the country. Just something, just simple things like, well, it's not simple, but simple things like that. How could you change your mentality, your direction, because we don't understand how that optimism is a good thing, and how that will propel us to another place. So how can I be intentional in my optimism?
Well, I do know that this is a conversation you have a lot on your podcast, because I've listened to yours some too. And I think that's a good thing, because a lot of times out there, we don't have good examples of how we can do this intentionally. As a very quick story, I lost my mother at the age of 50 to a 15-year breast cancer battle, and I watched her die well. And I know that's an odd statement, but she tied up the loose ends. But she had time. She had hospice. She had, time to do all that. It was very important to her that the relationships were the most important thing. But I realized at 50, I had an 8-year-old adopted son. My husband is a small church pastor, and I was working for a very large university, doing work that I just didn't love. And I said, how can I be different, hopefully for the next 50 years of my life, if I'm going to live to 100? And so I took a really good, long, hard look, because there's things in my mother who was so bubbly. She was like, she would walk in a room and people would say, Judy, and she was like a bottle of champagne. And I'm not really that person. I am much more naturally pessimistic. If you study the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 6. I can see everything that's going to go wrong, but I use that information to mitigate it and do the other thing, right? So I can see all the different sides of things, and I have to be careful that I don't like poo-poo all the ideas, right? It's like, I don't want to be the person in the meeting. It's like, oh, that's not gonna work. I mean, it's like perfect for your podcast here.
Right.
But I can also say, but what if we did this? Right. So being intentional about being optimistic is a reminder to me that I have the ability with each step that I take to change my direction. I have the ability to affect the outcome. Nobody else in my life has the ability to affect the outcome, whether it's growing my business, whether it's having a health goal like losing weight or becoming strong or running a marathon or getting on 200 podcasts or whatever it is. No one else, Maurice, has that ability. You can't, the only way you can affect that at all for me is to have me on your podcast. And that's only one of my goals, right? So I am the only one who can do that. And so intentional optimism is a personal growth system that it's a philosophy that I've basically set up that says, I want to be optimistic. I want to be, and that means hope, right? How many times do people need hope? We just need a little hope and some positivity, knowing that things are going to turn out okay. And, even in our political climate right now, or our financial climate right now, I've told my husband, it's like, I can't even imagine that the United States is going to be any different than any other historical big country. Look at Greece, look at Rome, look at, all these other countries. This is the natural order of things.
Right.
I'm going to survive in that because I have the ability to come up with new ideas. So optimistic is hopeful and positive and purposeful, but also being present, that childlike wonder or that grown-up wonder that I talked about, making sure that I am generous with my time and pouring into other people, because that's what does it for. I mean, that is the way to make connection, is to pour into other people. But also being willing to be energetic. And I think you touched on that a little bit with your Santa Claus theory, was that we have the ability to generate our own energy based on finding things that bring us joy, finding things that spark energy in us, because then we can share that. And then the piece that, in my bio, I talk about resilience being earned. It's because we have to put courage into the actual mix. We have to be willing to try some hard things. We have to be willing to be the leader. Somebody's got to go first. And if I'm in a group, it's usually me, just because most people sit around. I'm like, okay, I'll go first. Right. But the lead goose is very important in that formation, and they rotate that in and out. Right. But we are all leaders. We each lead ourselves. So stepping up is very important. And then wisdom is a piece that we need to incorporate into our optimism, because we do need to be able to see what's going on in order to be able to have awareness of the issue, to make like, I don't want to sit around and talk about problems.
Right.
I do want to sit around and talk about a problem with how we move towards a solution. And I do understand that not everybody has that ability. Some of us, we all have strengths and we need to play to them. And I used to tell my staff, only come to me with solutions. Well, then they quit coming to me. And I realized, well, that's not going to work. They need me to help with solutions, right? And so figuring those things out. But understanding too that when we are respectful and when we use our words carefully and when we understand other people, that's using the knowledge that we have in a wise way. And that perpetuates all of it, which also keeps optimism from getting like sunny, right? It's like, it doesn't need to be not sunny, but what I mean? And then intentional is, having a purpose. I used to work in medical institutions, and you could hear me coming down the hall because, of course, I wore heels. I'm a 5'1", so I'm going to wear something to get me like, I got to have a little bit more
Right,
presence.
right.
But they would, in both, I was at two big Atlantic kind of Ivy League institutions. And in both places, people said, I can hear you coming. And I'm like, well, I have some place to go.
Right,
I'm
right.
purposeful. I'm not wandering. You're not going to hear me wandering around you might hear me stomping through the woods, but if I'm
Right.
in the woods or if I'm, out doing something like that's very different. I'm purposeful in my direction. I know about to teach my son to drive. So there's a point on the horizon I'm looking
Wow.
at. And, it's like, I know that's my ultimate goal. So I know the road may twist and turn and go in circles and up and down, but that's my ultimate goal. And having that intention means that all these other pieces I can be intentional about being optimistic, intentional about courage and wisdom and presence. So I think having the ability to put those two words together. As a matter of fact, I just got notice of the trademark on it. So being
Wow.
able to put those words together is something that is a daily reminder for me, because I get tired, man. I get exhausted. We got family health things going on. We got money things going on. We got the whole and the financial and the political world, and I get worn down. And by the end of the day, sometimes I get negative in my head, and it's like,
Right,
no,
right.
nope, tomorrow's another day, and I'm going to wake up, and I need to sleep and rejuvenate and do that. So being intentional about where I'm headed, and then just reminding myself of my goals is like, where am I going? This is what I'm doing. So I think that's important.
Wow, Andrea, I think you've provided a whole wealth of information. I appreciate you coming on. But listen, I have a question, one last question. Where can someone reach out to you where they can learn to be intentionally, stay in that intentional space of finding authenticity, finding their passion, but ultimately finding hope? Because again, that's something that people don't have, like you said, just with everything that's kind of going on. So where can they reach out to you to find that?
Well, my website is theintentionaloptimist.com. So that's an easiest place to find me. I respond to DMs on both Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you tell me that you heard me on That'll Never Work, then I know where you are coming from. And I know that you're not spam.
Right.
I get a lot of connections, and it's like, don't you want to work with me? I'm like, no, I just wanted to connect with you.
Right.
So don't spam me, but I'll know that if you say that, I'll know where it came from. But the other thing is, if you go to my website, right above my head is a button that says Free Core Values Exercise. And that is a really good place to start because it'll help you start walking through the things that are non-negotiable for you. I also have a podcast that Maurice mentioned called Stand Tall and Own It.
Yep.
And that is also, there's a everything can be found right there from my website.
I thank you very much. So if y'all go on and check out, she has a download her one-page core values discovery exercise. So, I encourage each and every one of you to do it. I've done it myself. So I just want y'all to know.
Really quick, if you did it, tell me what you think your core values might be.
See, the challenge is that because I'm in school at the same time and I just had.
Oh, you busy?
Yeah. No, I'm not busy. But what it is that what you provide here versus what school has is like they're conflicting. So now I'm like, I don't know where I am. I guess I have to kind of switch off which brain to use at any given time.
I tell you what, we'll stay in touch, and you let
Most
me know.
definitely. I will. So, but I thank you very much for coming on the show. But of course, I got to ask you the question before I let you go. Would you rather choose 3 doors or a fork in the road?
Well, we chatted beforehand. I've already thought about this. And I'm a fork in the road person because one of my favorite poems is the Robert Frost poem, The Road Less Taken. And I'm always the road less taken, or at least I've taught myself to become a road less taken person. But the other thing is there's always going to be another fork in the road.
Yes.
There's always opportunities. As long as I'm on the road, Maurice, I'm moving. If I'm standing in front of 3 doors, I haven't even started. And so for me, it's all about movement and of course, being intentional about moving. So I think I would probably take the road less taken in the fork and see where that leads me and see what else. Because of according to Frost, it made all the difference.
Most definitely. I thank you very much for coming on the show. And it's interesting your point of view. Again, I said there's no parameters,
Yep.
everybody offers something different. I think that this question allows us as entrepreneurs or those that have yet to venture out yet, how to you can get to your goal through various roads, through various points of journey, whatever it is, and how to navigate through this whole thing called life. So I thank you very much for your point of view on that.
Yeah, thank you. This has been my pleasure.
Cool. And thank you very much for listening to That Will Never Work. Of course, follow her on social media. Go download the course, get to the 4-module course, all that type of stuff. So I thank y'all very much for listening today, and I will talk to y'all a little later.
Group LLC, and check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, that will never work, or will it?